Onto this now. While government says the prevention of combating of hate crimes and hate speech bill will help reduce crimes motivated by hate, some beg to differ. Civil rights organization AfriForum has made a written submission to the Select Committee on Security and Justice, arguing that this bill would worsen what it calls double standards regarding hate speech in court verdicts. Now, today, the Free Speech Union of South Africa held a webinar on the constitutional and legal implications of criminalizing hate. Executive Director of the Campaign for Free Expression, Professor Anton Harber, was one of the panelists on this discussion, and he joins us virtually from here in Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time this evening, Prof. Always good to have you on. Before we speak about the bill specifically, I was quite intrigued by one of the quotes from this webinar, where you said while your organization supported the measures to prevent and stop hate speech in the country, here you said, I'm talking about real hate speech, not speech that is offensive or critical, irritating, pushes the boundaries, but speech that really threatens imminent harm to groups in particular. And I want to know from you whether you feel like the actual definition of what hate speech is and all of the grey spots now in between is what is keeping us from nailing those who are actually pushing hate speech on the various platforms now at people's disposals.
No, I don't think that's the reason. But in fact, we've been quite effective at nailing those people who've been guilty of hate speech. One of the mysteries of this new law that they've tabled is why we need it, because so far we've been able to use crime and injuria. We have a number of laws that can be used to deal with hate speech, including the Equality Act, which is quite a recent act that deals explicitly with hate speech. So suddenly there's a new law. The first draft of it, which we saw 3-4 years ago, was really a very worrying law in that expanded the definition of hate speech to a dangerous extent. You know, let me say that you know, I share the deep concerns and dislike and need to act against hate speech. But there's a danger that if you define it too loosely and give too much scope to the idea, then you'll catch people who are not guilty of hate speech, but who are guilty just of being critical, even offensive. And we have to keep the definition very clear. It's got to be real hate speech. So the first draft of this bill didn't do that. It opened it wide up, very worryingly. I must say this new draft, which is being considered at the moment, is considerably better. And it has the lobbying and the representations and the push to improve the bill has succeeded to a large extent.
Why did we need this bill then, if you believe that our constitution and the laws of the land at the time already gave us the tools to deal with actual hate speech? Was there then the fear that this bill would fall in the wrong hands, as it were, especially if we find ourselves in a heated political atmosphere or time in our country's timeline where this kind of bill can be used to crack down on free speech, as is the fear you voiced?
So let me explain this. The bill has two parts. The first part deals with hate crime and the second hate speech. The hate crime section simply says that if you commit any crime where it can be shown that it was motivated by hate, then you get additional penalties. And I have no problem with that. I think we have to be tight on hate crime, and I have no difficulty with that. But as you're indicating, it's a mystery why we need the hate speech section. And I think it's just to serve a pre-election political call to do something about it. Because where we face the problem, you think of the Penny Sparrow case, for example, we have plenty laws that deal with it. The Equality Act, as I said, assault legislation, incitement legislation, crime and injuria. I don't believe we need a new act, and I don't believe that, you know, this new act threatens 8 years of imprisonment for hate speech.
Sure.
And I must say that concerns me a great deal, because I'm not sure prison is the best way to deal with the problem.
And your webinar, the webinar you were part of, spent quite a bit of time talking about what would be seen as acceptable forms of punishment, for want of a better phrase, for somebody found guilty of hate speech particularly. What kind of international best practice is there for us to look at, though, to guide us on what would be the best way to go forward with that kind of thing?
International best practice is very clear. You have to keep the definition of hate speech very tight, and you would only threaten imprisonment for the most extreme cases, the most serious, the most potentially harmful cases that threaten real violence. For the rest, our Quality Act suggests fines, forced apologies, other forms of rehabilitation. And I must say that I think that if we start throwing people into prison for hate speech, more than anything else, we're going to create martyrs for racists who are sent to prison.
From your research and delving into this new bill, does it arm our legislators, our justice system, our law enforcers, does it arm them with a better understanding of how to deal with hate speech used on this great, big, complicated world of social media? Because that is a world unto its own, to a certain extent.
Well, the law, most of the cases we've had, or many of the cases we have come from what people have done on social media. Ordinary, kind of everyday people communicating, sometimes privately on social media, sometimes publicly. And those are the most prominent cases we've had. And the law has dealt with it. This law would apply to anyone in whatever medium they are, such as social media. It would apply. And it would threaten them with prison as opposed to some of the measures we've seen so far.
Just finally, before I let you go, Johannesburg bar advocate Mark Oppenheimer is one of the panelists along with you, and he made the distinction between hate speech and crimen injuria, and looking at hate speech targeting groups and not individuals. Why is it important for us to differentiate between who's targeting groups and who's targeting individuals, and how could that bill impact either groups or individuals found guilty of hate speech in the future?
Yes, look, if I threaten you, or I say something very harmful to you, then we've got standard law of defamation, of assault, of crime and injuria that deals with that. Hate speech is meant to deal with when you deal with groups on the basis of their characteristics, such as race being the most obvious. But it applies to sexuality, any group. So hate speech is about attacking a group on the base of the characteristics of that group. And so the law separates that from dealing with personal attacks on a person, because it's seen as a special crime. It's one thing for me to call you names. It's another for me to start talking about all people of a certain characteristic or a certain characteristic like race or gender. Then it becomes potentially hate speech.
We are I'm not even sure if we can say a few months out. Next year is the next big national polls, and one that's expected to be a very, very important one for South Africa. Your organization, Campaign for Free Expression, are you expecting to keep a very close eye on the temperature rising when it comes to speech, free speech or otherwise, on social media as we head ever closer to that highly politicized time?
Look, our concern and what we'll watch out for is the election must be as open as possible. People must be able to express their views, to meet, to speak out, to protest. And, we've often find that, this is the first election in this country since democracy that really looks like it will be hotly contested, and in which the governing party faces a serious chance of losing power. It's those situations in which measures are often used to try and silence critics, to try and prevent certain things coming out, to make it a less open society. And we have to be very vigilant to preserve the openness and the free expression that is so important and so valuable for our democracy.
Okay, we can leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, as always. Executive Director of the Campaign for Free Expression, Professor Anton Harber, joining us virtually from here in Johannesburg.